Okay, here we are, the second series of a Revolution in Education podcast, teaming up with my good friend and colleague now, Jim McCue, and we're going to hustle a bunch of other people into the mix. For example, Jack, Chan, and Hunter from Barrington High School, who are helping us figure out how we can utilize this podcast series and get it out into the ethosphere to other educators around the world and the United States to kind of think about how we can stop doing school the way we all imagine school should be and start to reimagine what it could look like. I think I want to say a little bit about the sort of the intent of this podcast second series. Before, or what happens typically is that we foreground certain ideas and what we've decided to do, Jim and I have decided to do with our colleagues and friends, is rather than foreground the ideas, is to really sort of foreground the people and the stories who are trying to revolutionize education. You know, we can talk about project-based learning, and I'm not anti-project-based learning. I love project-based. I love community-based learning. I love all these different things. But as many of you have heard me at all, I talk about how we don't need an evolution in education right now. We need a revolution. It's not about having double periods or having a slapping on a project-based unit at the end of a class. It's really a paradigm shift, I would argue. A paradigm shift that puts learning at the center and has us think about ourselves as facilitating students' sort of natural proclivity to learn in the world, which we kind of take away from them at a young age. I don't know, Kyle, if you would argue with that or not, but you know, we're trying to lift up the fact that all around the country and the world, there are educators who have basically said to themselves, you know, what we're doing is really a gross disservice to our youth. And I know this is true for Kyle. He will say, it's also a gross disservice to the adults who are wanting to serve the youth. And that we need to rethink exactly what this ecosystem of education, teaching, and learning looks like. So, and how we go about thinking about and assisting and supporting youth to pursue their interests and passions and become people who have their own agency to make a difference in the world, which I think is, and live the lives they really want to live. And I forget exactly, I think it was Jim found Kyle one way or the other. I saw a YouTube that Kyle had. I would highly recommend looking at some of the videos that Kyle has made. He has a wonderful book that details some of the things he's learned over time. He interestingly, he was at High Tech High, as Jim was many years ago, but he's in Hong Kong now. And I was like, the first question I had for him, which we can answer at some point, is, you know, well, what the heck are you doing in Hong Kong? You know, and I think that's part of the storyline. So without further ado, the real purpose of this is to kind of like get a window into, you know, who are these people around the world who are doing their damnedest to change the way we think about teaching, learning, and schooling and what we do to support youth. And here he is halfway around the world doing that. And we want to find out, like, well, how did you end up there, Kyle? And, you know, what's your trajectory? Where did you start, you know, from a young age? Why is this something that you're pursuing? And why does it matter to you? And what do you think we need to think about so that, you know, in the revolution persists and we continue and we bring more revolutionaries on board? What needs to happen? So I know that's a large introduction to all this, but yeah, Kyle, who are you? Why are you in Hong Kong?
Yeah, that's a huge question. Which part of that which question you want to answer first? Is about
you get to go wherever you go for it.
All right, so I'll start with a simple narrative. I think passing the mic, I mean, something that you mentioned is empowering youth, right? And I think through the whole, before I introduce myself and who I am and why I'm here, I'm very passionate about this. COVID has really had us shake up the way we think about school, and the way that we think about learning. I agree that I think project-based learning is a nice segue, but there's really deeper issues at bay, and it's really about empowering youth. And I say pass the microphone because it's very rarely that we'll give the students a microphone to say what changes they see, what do they want to see in school, what does that look like. So whether we're passing the microphone to students, whether we're passing it to teachers who have revolutionary ideas that they want to enact in their school, I'm here in Hong Kong just trying to pass the microphone. Basically, I'm trying to highlight and empower schools and systems that really want to shake up teaching and learning. Individuals that are doing it even outside of schools in a remote type of setting, because students now can meet anytime, any place, anywhere. Learning is not tied to the school. So I'm in Hong Kong here trying to do that. Long story short, High Tech High sparked the interest in me. That was the seed to see what could be. That seed got spread in different parts of the world. Somehow I got over here in China doing summer program, helping empower youth to learn English through drama, arts, games. Saw these kids who were learning English and not spoken a lick of English, and by the end of a week, we're giving full-fledged performances. And that kind of power that you see is, I think it's contagious. And I'm just over here now, trying to spread that and pass the microphone to the courageous educators who are doing it and giving them a couple tools and tricks to make it happen.
All right, well, that's the short version. Let's get into the long version of this. Okay, are you ready for this? So we're going to go with the long version. First of all, you ended up at High Tech High, but tell us a little bit about how did you end up at High Tech High?
Okay, so I'll try to put it in a window of what High Tech High was. I was in San Diego. Not everybody's fortunate to be that close to, such a interesting kind of model. I was a new teacher. I had just been teaching 2 years, back at my old middle school, in fact. And I remember someone in the lunchroom, it was an old teacher I had who I was now working with. And I remember him saying, every time I present an idea, he'd say, it's like this everywhere. You just got to get used to it. And I remember him saying that over and over again. And I think a lot of teachers at that place, and it was a great place. We had a very supportive principal, but that became the MO for a lot of teachers who weren't really wanting to make change. And so, I said, I'm young enough, I'm idealistic enough, I'm going to search for a place that actually is like that. And it was only, 15 miles away, and that was High Tech High. I went to the Bonanza, who I think Jim, I don't know if he's been to that.
Twice.
Did you do the Bonanza? Oh, you did it twice. Yeah, because I didn't get it my first time. I got rejected.
Oh.
So you had to do it twice too. You said you did it twice. Why did you have to do it twice? Did you not make it the first time?
Because I was living on the East Coast at the time. I flew out for the first one, and they really liked me, but they needed help at a different school. And so I flew out like a couple weeks later, and then met up with Caleb Rashid, and he was amazing. And so connected with him on a personal level, but went through the Bonanza. For those that are listening and aren't sure, it's like a full day of an interview. It's like a super day where you present a lesson. You are truly interviewed, interrogated, like truly trying to develop like who you are as a person through a student lens. And so Kyle's like describing this process. It is truly a bonanza. It is crazy.
Yeah. And if you ever seen these, like, I don't know if you felt this way, Jim, but if you've seen the reality shows of like the chef, and they give them a couple ingredients, right? And they got to make something out of it. And they have all their different teams. I watched one about like these gardeners, and they have these different challenges, and they've got to come up with like putting these flowers together in a creative way. And they've only got like 3 hours to do it, and the time's ticking. Like, that's what it felt like in the Bonanza. And the first time I attended it, I was completely out of my league and out of my element.
Oh,
I don't know if that's how you felt.
Yeah. Oh, and it's intense in a good way, because you're trying to find out the mutual fit of which they're determining if you're a good fit, but you want to understand like how best you can support that environment for students. So truly understand.
Yep. And the student interviews are probably, I know we got Jack and Hunter on here and Sean. The student interviews I thought were the toughest, to be honest, like, because they would ask you the real kind of point blank questions. One, I remember they asked, are you going to be a teacher who assigns us a lot of homework? And, on one hand, you're kind of like, shoot, do I shoot myself in the foot and say, no, I don't really assign any homework? And then maybe that's not what the administration is looking for. Maybe homework isn't. And so it's not maybe rigorous or appears to be rigorous. So you're kind of doing this song and dance the whole time. But I really think they're looking, as you mentioned, it's a culture fit, right? I mean, they're looking to see if you're going to integrate in this culture, and the culture is built around a community. There's not the divisions that you see typically in a school, right? Where it's like you're being passed along to all the different stakeholders, but yet the stakeholders aren't speaking the same language. Everybody at High Tech High spoke the same language. They were very clear about what they wanted to do. And the students were at the heart of that. Project-based learning is what helped drive that culture. So
yeah, I know you make a big deal of that in all your work, right?
Sure.
Focusing in together as a community on what matters most, right? And so, but let's go back. Tell me about, okay, you're in kindergarten versus, I don't know how far back you can remember, but like, what was your, like, what was your history as a student? What was that like?
All right. Gosh, we got to go way back. Okay, we'll take the time machine then back to when I was in school. I actually happened to be a real good student. Like, I played the game of school pretty well. I could be, charming with the teachers, and I always feared ever getting in trouble, so I do whatever it took. If I was second ranked in the class, I'd have a fit. So it seems it seems probably odd, I think, especially because a place like High Tech High is I guess a little bit for the rebels. But that was my history as a student. So I wasn't, a bad student, but I actually, if you fast forward just a little bit, to college, I was lost. I think a lot of people are lost. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to be a surgeon because I watched surgeries on the Discovery Channel, and I could, withstand seeing the blood. And I thought it was always interesting. But got into biochemistry, and within, I think, 2 months realized, no, this is not for me. Switched over to business because I really liked ideas and people and building things. So, I felt lost with that. And I guess that's kind of been a bit of my narrative of probably how I found High Tech High in these kind of environments, is that, I really want, students to be connected to enough of things that exist outside of school to understand that life isn't school, and, how can we get students to be able to follow or pursue something that they're, really good at.
That's a big idea. How did that idea come to be for you? Was it like in your college experience, after that, at High Tech High? Where did that idea come from?
I mean, so I think it's part and parcel of a lot of things. I think part of it is understanding what you're good at. I felt like I came to grips with what I was good at by looking at what hobbies I was pursuing, but even less what hobbies were I pursuing, but just when people light up, whatever you're doing that, makes other people tune in and lean forward, I think is a good indication of, what that potential thing could be for you. And I had always enjoyed helping, supporting others, connecting people. And so, there was never a light bulb necessary moment. It was kind of an evolution for me in terms of, kind of discovering that. And I loved teaching, and I loved learning, and I loved working with students. But I thought that you just had to be inside of a school, inside of your classroom was your fiefdom. And I enjoyed that. But it was looking at, well, how can we combine that with trying to spread this kind of, new form of learning, always doing things differently, not relying on your same kind of lesson plans or curriculum guide that you had. And so that's, I think, where a little bit of the entrepreneurship side came in, and being able to start a program from scratch, and then connecting that with my interest of teaching and learning, my interest in, starting things and getting people on board. Those things kind of combined.
So you didn't want, you were in you didn't like biochemistry, you were in college, you went into business. So take us through, give us the storyline. Give us some of the highlights, okay? From there to high tech high, what's the trajectory?
Yeah, so I went to business, then I switched over to liberal arts, and history was something that I saw that the teachers within history seemed to be most passionate about what they're doing. They taught history in a very thematic type of way, so I gave that a shot and got interested in that. And so from social studies, then went into the education route, taught a few years, as I mentioned to you, and then saw that there was really something more I was longing for than just being inside of a classroom, but really being part of a whole culture of movers and shakers that want to change the way in which we educate. So yeah, I don't know.
Okay, so fast forward to today. You're from high tech high to today. What's that journey? And what are you doing?
Yeah. So there's a lot of time in between that. So I guess, yeah, I'm piecing together, I guess, a narrative that's going to be, it's going to be somewhat resonate, with your listeners. And I'm sure listeners that are tuning into this, want potentially some kind of revolution, right? They're of your kind of mindset that they might have been doing some things in the corner of their school. They might have been doing some innovative things where they provide students some more choice in terms of how they're demonstrating, work or understanding. They might have heard about High Tech High or other schools. And so in terms of that and connecting that narrative to where I am today, I was that same, kind of person. I'm the same kind of person who's listening, who's tuning in to this podcast and wondering probably where is the first step, where can I start making a little bit or enacting some of these changes? So I view that whole progression through High Tech High. I was fortunate enough to be thrown into the wolves, maybe how Jim felt as well. Like this was so far outside of my comfort zone. They say that in that kind of environment, and Jim, you might have seen this too, you either sink or you swim.
Truly.
Yeah. So, I mean, as much as we give this credit to High Tech High, and it's great, there is a high turnover of people who don't necessarily make it in this kind of system. And, so a bit connecting that to my life is seeing that working in a traditional school. So I went from High Tech High and I went over here to China because another school was trying to do something similar to what High Tech High was. And I wanted to come in guns blazing and say, all right, I've seen it happen. Here's what we got to do. There's a lot of these traditional systems that are in place that have got to be shaken up. But when you come in with kind of like a wired or pioneer type of attitude, not everybody is ready for that. And, so we had to be very strategic in the way in which this program that we developed inside of this big, large international school, the way in which it could take root and people can feel empowered to start making some of those changes. So that was Futures Academy at the International School of Beijing that we started this program. And it was going to act as a catalyst for the rest of the school in terms of making learning more personalized for students, getting them connected to community, connecting teachers across different subjects, having them follow their passions. And so, that then was me kind of stepping back from being in an environment where, yes, this is what everybody does and everyone's challenge each other, to how do we start something like this and build it kind of from the ground up. So seeing what teachers and educators really need to empower them in that system, to then now starting kind of my own consulting and training work with schools, because every school has a different story. Every school serves a different type of student. Every school is a different type of community. If we talk about revolution, we are going to get some people. Yes, we need those people. They're going to be the front runners. But even more, we need the people who are a little bit skeptical, but yet still willing. And those are the people who are going to make the biggest change. Jim, I saw you nodding your head.
No, I agree with everything that you're saying. And you have like energy and purpose around going from the US to Hong Kong, and you want to honor that commitment and that emotion and that sense of urgency, but you know that going into a new space, you're trying to like humbly learn about like what is available there, what are they doing, and like having that conversation before any work is done. Because as you know, you want to build authentic relationship, and you want to know that others are feeling that like true intention of building a community, and you're not going to just show up one day and leave the next. Like you're still there. And so what was that experience like for you, like having these ideas of change and what education could be, and those dialogues that you have with teachers and students and building school culture? Like, what was the humbling moment for you to recognize like your place in that space, and exhibiting like demonstrably so, like you're still there? Like, what allows you to stay?
Yeah, and just that's a great question. And just to clarify too, I was, in China, in Beijing. This is where we were starting that program. I'm here now in Hong Kong, so I have still stayed over in the Asia region, but I have left that program. And what you mentioned, Jim, I think is most important. You have to humbly be willing to learn first, like the culture, the place that you are in, because at the end of the day, most teachers, and I'd say you're going to be very hard pressed to find teachers who are just completely checked out. They don't like what they do. They're ready to retire. I mean, we built this narrative, but in a lot of places that I'm in, the teachers, they got into this to serve, students, to empower learners, and whether they're very excited about their subject matter or they're excited about, what they can do with students. So I think to honor that, you've got to, as Jim mentioned, you've got to first ask questions. Ask questions to say what's going on, what's worth celebrating. What do we have here that's worth celebrating? And that could be as simple as, hey, they changed up one unit, and just a couple teachers got together in a coffee shop. And I found this out at a school that I was working with. They got together at a coffee shop. They said, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to build a whole project around this whole social emotional aspects of how COVID is affecting students. And we're going to have students connect to students on the other side of the world and help build kind of tutorials for how to cope during this time. Other people that I've talked to have connected learners, and it's this program that they get on Zoom. They build, things together and learn about each other's cultures and build podcasts together. And now they put out that podcast, series. So that's where they're at. And as opposed to saying, bringing something in and saying, here's what needs to happen. Where are you at? What are you willing to do? And how can I support that? So you can't really try to move gigantic boulders downhill. You got to have some momentum.
Yeah. And I hear in summarizing that, like the assets that all students are offering to their classroom experience and working in like positive interdependence with other students. And I wonder how that aligns with the pressures of like teachers, especially during this time, like attending to scope and sequence and standards that they have to hit and curriculum that they have to hit, and bridging like what was known about assessment and results as it relates to before COVID. And now like all of us in this identity quake of like, we're all novice teachers again. Like you could have been a 20-year teacher, but now you're facing the realities of, oh my God, I don't know how Zoom works and this virtual engagement, and how do I really understand what students are learning? And so I wonder how you've been able to tap into the acknowledgement of teachers recognizing themselves as that paradigm shift between, hey, this feels weird, I've never experienced this before, to we're truly innovative in this space and we're revolutionary. And how do you encourage the novice teacher and the more tenured teacher to feel like what they're doing is foundational and they can tap into their assets, but know that what they're trying and doing is truly remarkable because they're trailblazers? I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I think the novice mentality is a nice one to have, regardless of where you're at. If you're 5 years, if you're 10 years through, and I think it's, if you look at COVID as an opportunity rather than an obstacle, you could see it as an opportunity that everybody's been thrown into this kind of novice position together, regardless of where you're at. And so that in and of itself, I think, is allowing everyone to either reignite their passion for why they got into this profession, in the first place, or see that, maybe this particular profession, wasn't something, that they were cut out for. Because now the nexus of control that used to be the classroom, that used to be students are going to come in, they're going to be sitting down, and we've got our lesson plans, we got our standards to cover. The students have to get credit, for this class and to get their GPA or get their diploma, to one that is, a kid doesn't necessarily have to turn their camera on. You hear this all the time, of teachers complaining, saying, I can't, how do I get my full engagement of my class in this online setting? And I think the same principles to like tapping into engagement still are at play, whether you're a first year teacher or a teacher who's been teaching 10 years. Yes, it looks different in this digital environment, but what are the kids really interested in? What are they talking about? How can you make what your material is that you got to teach connected and tapped into what those kids really care about? How can they make a meaningful contribution so that they're not just soaking up content, but they're actually taking that content and doing something with it? Now, if you have those three questions answered, it doesn't matter if you're using Zoom, if you're using Google Hangouts, if you're using Microsoft Teams, if you're using Padlet or whatever technology resources you have. Like, let's get away from the technology and let's look at what is driving that learning process, and then look at how can the technology help to supplement that.
Well, that's why I really wanted to talk to you. Just simply, you focus on the power of simple, and that allows for more complex solutions that are derived from students. And so it makes me think about the current environment. And this podcast will be presented to the public sometime in March. So I apologize for other things that might come about during the next month or so, because we're recording this in January. But you recently posted on Twitter, you're talking about events that happened at the beginning of this month in January. And I think in speaking to a lot of teachers and educators, like we're struggling to address the needs of students as they react to things that have existed in the political sphere. You're talking about like ways to authenticate like this learning experience. Can you talk more about like how to properly do that in a classroom environment that's productive, supportive, and like very, very much enriching to students and the families and the communities in which they're a part? Yeah.
And, if we could name the experience, obviously, that we're talking about now, things might change, in March, but it was the, March on the Capitol and the riots that took place. And more than just, protest, is really kind of a threat to democracy, in general. So these kind of events, and then obviously fueled by a lot of, racist statements that have been made. And, the whole, country is quite upset, and rightfully so. And the big question is, well, how do we address this with our communities? And where do we start, in this very contentious subject? And we have to address it, but how do we do that? And so that's what we're referring to. And I know these issues will still be going on in March, but I think the answer to that is you've got to do it in a way that makes sense for your own community. And the conversation can, take place in different forums. I've seen a forum here that they did where they brought the community together, and it was all just about race relations. And it was a group that was completely outside of schools, and they had the place filled all the way to the back of the room. They were just facilitating dialogue. They were doing it in a Socratic format. So they had a format in which how people shared and participated. And of course, there was tensions, there was heated moments. People have opinions on both different sides. But I think at the end of it, by them being able to talk about that in that kind of forum, was a way to work towards a healing process. So I'm using that as a microcosm of potentially what you could do in your classroom, and if you have certain protocols in place where you have a discussion format, you have something Socratic, bring forth some kind of article that's been written, bring forth some kind of event. have a way in which students are going to talk to each other, have a format to say, here are the expectations as we have this discussion. What we're expected to, yes, we can be very hard on the content, but be soft on people. That's something that came out of High Tech High as well. So have a way to facilitate that dialogue, and then have a space, hopefully, where, these ideas that kids are coming up with can be shared. I know one person they've started a website, and it's letting kids just publish articles around topics that are of interest to them. It's around mental health during COVID. It's around the Black Lives Matter movement. It's around this march on the Capitol. It's around addressing, people's kids with different learning, challenges and their needs. And the kids are publishing these articles. They're the ones who are leaving comments on it, and it's a nice, safe space and for them. And if they want to put that out into the general public, they can. So create that space, have a protocol for how you're going to make that discussion take place, and just be very open to what kids might present.
That's beautiful to hear. And the other reason that I'm excited for this conversation and why we reached out to you is like the identity of social emotional learning right now, and the non-cognitive skills that allow for all students to tap into their own success as defined by themselves. And so you talk about like realizing that in a community, and it's been amplified by this experience. So I wonder how your thoughts have changed about social emotional learning and the support structures that we create for students, and how adult learners and adult educators like model that behavior, so that we all, beyond this moment that we're currently in, can take away, for the listeners listening to this now or viewing this online, some like tangible things that they can take away, so that wherever they are building sustainable practices for strong SEL practices.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say I put this on a rock before in my house, and it just says be present. And I think when it comes to social emotional learning and putting that at the forefront, you're just being present. And whatever issues are on the news, whatever issues kids are coming in with, that's anything that's happened in the local community, things that have happened at home, domestically in that student's lives, they're coming in and they potentially didn't have a great breakfast or didn't get much sleep the night before, or they've got to wear these masks and be socially distanced. We're putting the needs of our students, of our community, before what our intentions are when it comes to curriculum. And so that would be my biggest piece of advice, is to say to be present. And I'll give you just another quick example of that. There's a teacher who had all the online curriculum, and it was related to social emotional learning. And so she was trying to be present, but there was a curriculum that was presented to her about like social emotional learning, and the kids were checked out. They weren't into it. And she said, I'm going to scrap this. I'm going to go with something I think they're talking about. It's Christmas time. It was right before Christmas. And she just said, look, you guys aren't completely into this. Let's do something meaningful for the community. You're going to reach out to somebody, and you're going to create a gift for that person. And you're going to design it in the maker space. You're going to carve it out of any materials that we have here. I'm going to help support you in that process, and you're going to present it to them. And she said, all of a sudden, the kids were having these positive emotions. They were talking about what they might do. Their social emotional learning needs started to go away. And that is a whole different approach than, a whole curriculum that's dedicated. That was her just being present and doing something different, and these kids having something to produce at the end. And so that's just an example. Just be present with your kids.
Well, I'm wondering whether I could call upon Jack, Chan, or Hunter. They've been listening for the last 40 minutes. You said a number of wonderful things. And I'm wondering if one of them wants to pick up from here and maybe ask a question. I mean, how is this, Jack, Chan, and Hunter? How is this? What are you hearing? What do you want to ask about? What's resonating with you or not resonating?
If I could jump in first, I I just had one comment when we were talking about the political sphere, and it made me think, from a traditional scene, there's a disparity between the value of fact and opinion in traditional school. In terms of our society, whether it be politics or any social emotional learning, is there a difference in disparity between fact and opinion when you engage in more personalized learning and you engage in those environments more? And are those social issues at the forefront? Are opinions valued more? And is that a threat to any facts of curriculum?
And are you talking specifically in relationship to the issues that we see, like the political issues?
As a start, I would say yes.
Yeah. Gosh, look, in our society, as you're mentioning, fact and opinion, that's something very hard to separate. What is fact and what is opinion now? Because everybody can post. You have access to anything, at your fingertips, whatever you want to hear. You can find someone who has that similar kind of viewpoint, and you can have your phone that literally you open your phone and everything that's fed into it is this people who think the same thing that you do. I'm tuning in obviously from Hong Kong, so I've been more exposed to what's happening in Hong Kong, but obviously, being American, I'm not far removed from that. But yes, I think facts do hold ground. I think facts need to be acknowledged. I think the idea of citizenship in general relies on being able to separate fact from opinion, being able to have an opinion, but hopefully being able to back that with some facts that are, helping to support that. So, that's where I guess the rigor comes in, right? Because we talk about this whole thing of personalized learning, and if a student wants to go this direction, they want to learn about this topic because that's what interests them. I think we still need to have those processes in place that ensures that, whatever they're choosing to do, whatever choosing to pursue, that they're ensuring that they're really going through a process of making that thing, whether it's, producing a video here, you guys, making a podcast, to, writing a song, whatever that personalized, choice that they're making, that they're able to have, connect to the people and the resources to make that, a more rigorous process than just simply watching a YouTube video or tuning in quickly to something or posting something online.
Jack, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it all sounds great. And I think, Hunter's question really resonates with me because I think right now, a lot of the things that we see going on in our classes are some things that are too touchy to talk about, or some things that we're worried we'll get too involved in and will distract us from what we're supposed to be learning. And I think that's kind of an interesting place that we're in right now. But I think for me, a question that I have for you, and a question I kind of ask a lot of people I meet through experiences like this, is if you had, one message to give to students that are my age right now and that are kind of in the middle of all these changes that are going on, what would that message be? What do we have to look forward to, and how can we contribute to positive change?
Yeah, that's a great question. The students always ask the toughest questions. So, I mean, if I'm looking back, and are you what, 19, 20?
I'm 17.
17. Okay. Yeah, there you go. Already super articulate. Yeah, that's a tough one. And it's tough probably for you right now. And I think probably a lot of students feel this way because you're looking at your future and you're looking at what's kind of happening in the world. And there's maybe a sense of kind of like, where's my place? What's in it for me? Where's my voice? Where can that be amplified? So my positive message, I think, would just be to find a space or find a place where you're able to have, your voice or influence and potentially amplified, and that there's, people who it resonates with. So, whatever that is from your sense, it might be in producing this podcast. I talked to some other kids who are over here filming a documentary about, changes in school and the kind of changes they wanted to see in school. And they're going all around China and filming different schools. And from doing that, you just, saw their level of engagement and positivity that was amplifying. So it doesn't matter what that thing is, but I think finding a space in which you can have your voice heard and voice amplified is going to be helpful and give you that positivity.
Well, I know that Jim and the students have a kind of a fun closing, but before we get to that fun closing, I mean, I wanted to get back to the storyline here, Kyle. I mean, you yourself have taken steps to have your voice amplified and to use your voice so that other teachers can raise their voice and find their meaning and pursue the work that they feel is of value to students, and to help create communities, I think, where everybody's voices can be amplified together in support of the students and so forth and so on. And you didn't stay in the classroom. You decided, I'm going to go to High Tech High, and then you decided to go to Beijing, and then you decided to work with you yourself have a trajectory, and I'm wondering about what can you say? Because I like yourself, I have often said I think that most teachers feel stuck in the system, and so what could you say, given your own sort of like persistence to make a difference in the ways that you feel you best can? What would you say to teachers who are likewise feeling stuck in the system and not knowing exactly what to do? What would you say?
So maybe it's something someone told me once. You can't bring a horse to water if it doesn't want to drink. And if you're a teacher that's in kind of school where you feel, or a system that you feel that stuck, that, it doesn't resonate, leadership isn't on board, you feel like you're out on an island, and typically what's going to happen is you're probably going to lose your optimism. You're going to lose that momentum. So first off, I would say be willing to move, right? I mean, vote with your feet, get out of that particular system that's not allowing you to do that. I don't know, Jim, you're on the East Coast, whatever drew you to High Tech High. What drew me to High Tech High is I felt like I couldn't really enact what I wanted to in the place that I currently was. So first off, you got to ask yourself that question, like, can I do it here? Do I have enough support? Because you're going to keep going up against those walls and you're going to lose that momentum. So, I mean, that would be the first thing. Jim, I saw you turn off your mic. Did you want to add something to that?
No, I just think, like, going into High Tech High, I had my own vision of what that could be, but you have to be vulnerable and willing enough to like engage in the iterative process of like being an educator in that space. So what I started off in understanding what that experience was, from project-based learning to progressive education, you learn along the way. It's like living in beta. You're kind of like building the staircase as you walk it up. And so what I grabbed from like High Tech High and my experience in project-based learning and like progressive education was built on that experience. So be willing to like not understand like the framework in which you're living. It's always going to be growing. And so what you establish today will change, and be willing to like, and be vulnerable enough to experience it. And that comes through dialogue with other people. It comes through listening, and not just like being the squeaky wheel in the conversation, but truly listening. And so that's what I'm hearing from your perspective is like all these chapters of your life, Kyle, you've been contributing because that's who you are, but you're also like learning a ton so that you give back to students. So it's a mutual street. It's a two-way street. And so whatever you get into, there's an opportunity for you to learn, but students to impact. Like Kyle, you said students ask the best questions. Jack, you threw out a great question for us. Like that's true. Like you made me think, and we're all trying to learn. So even if we're the teacher, we're the learner as well. And so that's a beautiful process.
Yeah, totally. So that's leading on to the second thing I would say is, be willing to step outside your comfort zone, as you just mentioned, right? High Tech High threw you out of the comfort zone. You felt like you were living in beta. So if if you feel stuck for a couple reasons. One, nobody's kind of listening to what you're saying or wanting to jump on board, or two, you're not being challenged, And so like, ask yourself deep down, what is preventing that? And we can make excuses all we want about, oh, the system won't let me do it, my classroom won't let me do it. Well, then why are you there? And if it really won't let you do it, then move somewhere else and get a little bit outside of your comfort zone, and always challenge yourself to step a little bit farther outside your comfort zone. High Tech High was a stretch for me. But then High Tech High, and it could have always been a stretch for me, of course, and I could have challenged myself more, but I felt like I needed a new challenge, and I needed to be in a place where could I potentially start something like this and build it from the ground up? I reached out to the founders of High Tech High, Larry and Rob, and asked them questions. I said, look, we're trying to do this in another school. Where do I start? I had to be a learner again and jump into that learner position. And so then from there, I said, okay, built that up, built a team, built up the curriculum, the projects. All right, what is the next thing that's going to make me step outside of my comfort zone? I'm going to write a book. Okay, that was a big stretch for me. Do I have something to say? All these thoughts came in, like, why is anyone going to listen to what I have to say? Those self-doubt. And okay, wrote that book. And then, okay, now what is a different step? Building, a business around serving other schools, and having to get on the phone, and find out where schools are at and where they need support. I mean, that was a huge step. So I would say, take your comfort zone wherever you're at as a teacher. What is the next step outside of it? And maybe the next step outside it is doing a project and getting kids in the community, or as Hunter mentioned earlier, starting a whole program within your school that's just around students doing internships or externships. Okay, then take the next step and the next step. You will expand your comfort zone enough where you will feel empowered to then step out and make the next step.
I love that. And we're gonna link to all of the resources behind your work, Kyle, your book, the practice that you have in Hong Kong, and some of your experience. But I want to get to some questions that we have, just fun and light. Our students are going to lead us off. They're meant to be quick, and so take as much time as you want, but meant to be a fun way to end the conversation. I think, Jack, you have the first, or maybe Hunter, you have the first question.
Yeah, I have one for you here, Kyle. When you think of the word successful, who is the first person that comes to mind and why?
Great question. I just listened to a podcast. They asked the very same question. I would say my dad. And the reason my dad comes to mind is because he raised him and my mom. I have to give my mom obviously credit. My parents, they raised 4 kids. They had zero money when they first started. I'm a quadruplet, by the way. And when we were born,
wait a second. We did not talk about that at all. You're a quadruplet?
Yeah, I know. I was like, maybe I should avoid, sharing this. Yes, I'm quadruplet. There's 4 of me.
I didn't mean to slow you down. That's awesome.
That's all right. Yeah, there's 2 fraternal, 2 identical. I'm fraternal. I keep saying I got my own egg, so there's no one who looks like me in this world. And they built a business. They got a loan somehow from the bank to let them in this crazy idea. My dad started this music school business. They built a house without knowing anything about building houses, by just, being persistent and resourceful. And now my mom's writing a book about raising quadruplets. And to me, I mean, they're the closest people to me. They're completely successful. They raised, a great set of kids with good values, and they've done, businesses from the ground up. And they are so optimistic at 69 about what's next. So that's cool. My parents, yeah.
That's awesome.
Right on. Jack, you have one for us?
All right. So our second question is, what is the book that you give the most?
That I give the most, that I like has influenced me the most?
That you gift the most to others, perhaps.
Oh, gift.
Oh, that I would gift. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. The gift the most. Yeah, that makes sense. You know what? It's an education book. So that's going to be a bit boring, but I think it's great. It's Ethic of Excellence by Ron Berger. And the reason I would say to gift this book the most is because it's how do you build this culture of craftsmanship in your classroom. And for anyone who is familiar with Ron Berger, it's just a great read.
Awesome. I'm going to take the next one. When Barack Obama was a community organizer, he would end engagements with others with the question, can you quickly, for me, describe your world as it is and how you'd like it to be? I'd like you, Kyle, to answer that question.
Yeah, so currently the way my world is, being over here in Hong Kong, having a way to connect with people across the world, being able to pursue hobbies, having spare time to develop ideas. And so that's the way my world is. The way in which I'd like the world to be or my world to be, is maybe having a large kind of community that is very dedicated to this. It's consistent. It shows up. We support each other. We're talking about changes. And then also at some point, liking to add, I have a partner currently, but it'd be nice to have a family as well. So that's how my world could be.
Chris, I think you're up next.
Oh, I get to come up with one?
No, we have, so, well, I don't mean to steal your thunder, Chris, but I have one for you if you'd like.
Go for it.
What are some common misconceptions about your passions in education that will inspire listeners to continue down that path?
Ones that were misconceptions in the past that I actually realized are not correct?
No, more so, well, you can answer that question and it's open for like however you want to interpret it. But I'm thinking like you're such a revolutionary. That's what we're trying to push for. So what are common misconceptions about your revolutionary style that needs to be addressed, and so that everyone can be attuned and like digest that as their own?
Yeah, so I think perhaps the misconceptions are that, this is for the top 1% or 0.5% of people, that have this capacity potentially to do it within a school. I think that's a common misconception I like to address, because that's typically where revolutionaries get, right? They get the gun-ho people, the ones who feel like they have to have all this passion, all this drive. And that's a misconception, because you don't have to have that same level of, energy or enthusiasm for it, or that kind of personality to do that. You could be in every kind of sphere, from being on the spectrum of being very introverted to very, very extroverted, and or being soft-spoken to be very outspoken. So I think that would be a misconception I like to clear up, is that this potentially can be for everyone, and there's no typical demographic that fits.
So I'll end with the last one here. I'll come up with one here. In the best of all worlds, in your greatest imagination, if you were doing something in 5 years that you were to be able to, if you looked in a crystal ball and you were to say, oh my God, I can't believe I'm doing that. That is just awesome. What is it that you're doing in 5 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so I've thought about that, and I think as much as I enjoy kind of this sphere of consulting, it would be nice to have something that is a network that's community driven, that's built from the ground up, that's this supportive hub. And I'm in Asia, so I love like this nice supportive community type of center where people can come in and out of their students, their teachers, their parents. Everybody's engaging in these community projects and solving these big, hairy kind of problems together. And I have a whole network of facilitators, from people from industry to business to NGOs. We're helping facilitate the process and inspiring others to be able to spread that.
Well, I think you should do it.
Yeah, thank you. You've given me the hope.
Well, if you want help, and if people want to work with you on it, maybe they should reach out and say, hey, Jim, I want to help you. I mean, Kyle, I want to help you do that. So let's see what happens. Anyway, yeah, Kyle, thanks very much. Your story is amazing. I love the story of your parents and raising the quadruplets, and venturing out of their comfort zone and making things happen. It sounds like exactly what you're doing, and I think feel like the whatever the cliche is, the apple didn't fall far from the tree or whatever, is true. And I wonder, it makes me really think about how much of that history and that identity formation it has shaped you. It's kind of very interesting to think about too. Anyway, Jim, anything else? Hunter, Jack?
I just want to thank Kyle for his time this morning for him and our student interns tonight. We're going to be presenting this in March, and our amazing student interns are going to be putting this out into social media, not only as a podcast, but on the web within like an embedded visual format. And so be on the lookout for that. We're going to embed some of Kyle's resources, his book, his practices, some of his experience there. So Kyle, can't thank you enough.
Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity. And Hunter and Jack, can't wait to see what you come up with, and mainly with your independent study course. I'd love to see that.
Thank you. Pleasure to meet you.
All right.